Hello. College Matchpoint is so excited to spend time with you this evening. Lisa Bain Carlton, our CEO and founder, Denard Jones and Bren Campbell on our team. This webinar is an annual webinar we do focused on a topic that so many students and parents are interested in, and that is thriving in the University of Texas at Austin's admissions overview. We welcome you. A couple of sort of mechanical points. We, of course, will be recording this webinar and sharing the link for it in the follow-up note, as well as the presentation materials that we cover. We encourage you to share your questions. As the case with so many webinars, you may put it in chat, you may put it in Q&A. If it's a question that we have time for and that we can cover, we'll definitely cover it for the group. If there are questions that are super specific to a student itself, themselves, we probably will try to follow up or point you to the right materials. Many of you know us and our team, and we're so grateful to work with your students. But a little of context to locate us. Lisa started College Matchpoint 12 years ago, and I think, Lisa, tell me if I'm wrong, maybe the first or second student that you worked with had UT Austin on their list.
I believe it was the first.
And so it's a school not only in our backyard, but a school that we have deep experience with. I don't know if it's the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours, but it might be a multiple of that. The majority of students we work with are actually not auto admit. We do work with some students each year that are auto admit, but the majority of students that we work with are not auto admit. And we're proud of all the students that we work with, whether or not they've gotten into UT or not, but we are really aware of how many students we work with who are thriving on the 40 acres at UT Austin. Lisa, do you maybe want to get us going by talking a little bit about the holistic process that UT Austin utilizes?
Absolutely. We're so glad that you guys joined us tonight. And this is one of our favorite webinars to do. We always do a couple of them every season. And I think we love it because, you know, there's always a lot of mystery surrounding the UT process. But honestly, one of the things we want to do tonight is share with you the things that we know that UT is actually being honest about, and that their process is incredibly holistic. Now, parents always ask us, what do we mean by holistic? And what we mean by holistic is that the UT admissions process is going to read everything you submit. So there are some schools that are what we call more numerical based. In other words, give me your grades, give me your test scores, we'll see if you're in. Really, UT does read your whole package. And as we'll talk about tonight, you know, there's definitely, you know, different pieces of that that are really critical to think through. And I want to frame this a little bit tonight as we get started. You know, we're going to talk about majors, and we're going to talk about test scores and transcripts. And one of the things that's really critical for students is to think, you know, like, how much do I want to be a Longhorn? You know, that's really important. And what's my drive in wanting to be a Longhorn? And so, you know, there's many, many ways to, you know, enter the University of Texas. And so we're going to talk about those things tonight, just a few little nuts and bolts things that really don't fit in the rest of the presentation. Currently there's two platforms that you can apply to the University of Texas on. One is Apply Texas. That's our Texas application, which you know, includes all the other Texas public colleges and some of our private universities. We highly recommend that our students do apply on Apply Texas because it gives you a little more room to expand on your activities and things. So you have a little more real estate, if you will, on your application. The other option is the coalition application. And sometimes students are applying to other coalition schools, so they want to be efficient there. But I think usually kids in Texas may be applying to other Texas schools, so Apply Texas makes sense. And so, of course, there's always that possibility that, you know, they could add another platform at any point, which is the second thing I want to say. What we're going to be talking about tonight is what we know historically. UT has been known to, change things around every year, like all universities, right? And so they don't necessarily publish everything until August 1st. So we're going to give you the broad overview of things. Pieces of it, we're like 99% sure we can't imagine how they would change, and remind you that they don't have to let everything out till August 1st. And actually a few years ago, they even, made some changes after August 1st. So they're with all college admissions, things can be fluid. So as we are talking tonight, I just want that to be in your head before we kind of jump in and get started. So we're excited to jump in.
I want to jump in and ask a sort of a question, Lisa. For some students and parents, a question might be, what would it mean if a school didn't utilize a holistic process?
Well, they might not ask for as much. I would say UT, and as we go through it tonight, I think you'll be surprised at how much they're looking for from their applicants, right? That there is a pretty significant amount of work that goes into a University of Texas application. So I would say that would be the first thing. And the second thing is some schools are just more numerical. So I think as we go through and you see all the things that they're asking for from students, many times parents will call me and say, well, they don't really look at that stuff, do they? And, we have had the joy of knowing enough UT admissions people to know, no, they actually do read every single thing that you put in. So, for all the rub that I think UT admissions get sometimes, one thing I love about it is you have the opportunity to really put your stamp on your application. Does that guarantee you getting in? Sadly, probably not. We don't know. No, it doesn't guarantee you, but you do have a lot of decisions and things that you can put into this mix to give yourself the best application you can possibly have.
A comment I would make, piggybacking on what Lisa said, is that it's awfully hard for a school that this year received 68,000 applicants for undergraduate admissions to ever even humanly interview even a portion of those kids. And yet UT goes the extra mile to say, we can't interview you, but if you can give us almost everything we can possibly read about you as a student, we want to consider that. We don't simply want to read a static file that got submitted. We want to get to know you as a student. And I think it's so encouraging and speaks to the values of UT Austin and how much they value the whole student, not simply sort of a flat static file. Another question, and then I'll ask Denard if there are any questions that folks submitted. Lisa, who reads these applications holistically?
Oh, that's such a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. So oftentimes, I think one thing that confuses students and families, and it's sometimes a little bit disappointing to them, like if they're, I had a student this year, she was so great. And so she kept saying, but I'm sure the people at McCombs are going to know this. Actually, your application is read from the admissions department, okay? So admissions, and they hire many readers from all over the country to read applications and train them on how they're evaluating applications. So it is not the academic department. There's a couple of spots where academic departments have a touch, but not a lot. We'll talk about some ways to maybe get some other people to read your application that you can use through the process. But your application sits with the admissions department and is not considered by the actual department that you're applying to.
Denard, are there questions that we have from folks when they're registered that Lisa or I have not been able to cover yet?
Yeah, there's a good one here about non-auto admits here. So one of our registrars asked, what is the admissions process like for a student who is not automatically admitted in that top percentage? Can you all speak towards that and maybe the difficulties or opportunities around that?
Absolutely. So I think Bob mentioned this, that we definitely work with, auto admit students, but we also work with a lot of non-auto admit students who get in all the majors. So I know someone in the questions had asked, is it even worth your time to apply if you're not an auto admit? Absolutely apply. The thing about UT is, like all admissions this last year, it's kind of asymmetrical. You're never going to quite know why it works. If you are interested in applying to the University of Texas, yes, you absolutely should apply if you're not an auto admit. Now, we'll get into this a little later, but specific majors become more difficult if you're not an auto admit. Now, we have had kids in every major there is get accepted as non-auto admits, but in general, it is a little more difficult there. So we'll talk about that when we get to that, but that's a great question. And when you see as many applications as last year, one of the things that you see is, it becomes a little more difficult for sure.
Anything else?
Yeah, a little bit piggyback off of that, just for our out-of-staters. Do you see a significant difference in terms of the application process? Do you have any tips for those out-of-staters to actually focus on the application?
A few things. It's more difficult to get out of state. And yet, like all flagship schools, I think UT wants to admit as many as the state allows them, basically, right? So they're legislated to only be able to accept a certain number of students, right? From out of state. I think it's really important. I sometimes see out-of-staters just sort of ignoring. The other thing UT does great is on their website, they tell you what they want. And just like all college admissions, if it says optional, you're supposed to do it, okay? Optional is not optional in college admissions. So there's a few spots on there that the people will be like, I don't really need to do that. I can't understand why, oftentimes other consultants will say to us, I don't understand why my students aren't getting in. And I start going through all the things you need. Like, oh no, we didn't think that. It's optional. We didn't think it was really serious. Yes, you actually need to really follow it. And some of it does seem, there are some parts of the UT process when we get into it that is pretty different from other colleges. So I know that people from other states are kind of like, really? And it's like, yeah, you really should follow the directions, because Denard mentioned a perfect word a few minutes ago in one of his questions, opportunity. UT is giving you so many opportunities to actually impact your application. Take all of them. That's going to up your chances. It's not going to guarantee you, but it is going to up your chances.
Great. Lisa, could you maybe start us off talking a little bit about the trends? I mentioned one, and that is UT saw an incredible growth, like so many selective schools, as a function of test optional. In the past, UT had traditionally seen applications in the 50 to 55,000 student range for undergraduate. They saw 68,000 students, driven in large part, not exclusively, by the fact that UT went test optional. Lisa, what other trends did you see that the class of 2022 and beyond might want to consider?
Well, I think sort of piggybacking on what you're saying, so when we had more applications, right, we saw the top 6% taking more slots, like just filling the seats of especially those some of the competitive majors. So that meant there were just less seats available. So when we talk about majors, I think it's really important to listen on that, because going for one of the most selective majors, well, those top 6% students are filling those up. So that I think is one thing that what seemed, we never know, but it did seem that was playing in. One of the things that we have wondered, but we don't have any way of knowing, but it is definitely a trend in college admissions, is that colleges are, just like you want to get in, they want to know if you're going to come, right? And so it really is a two-way street, even though it doesn't feel like it. And so one of the things that it looked like in some of the decisions was that potentially they were also looking at yield, like who would say yes. And so all the colleges have developed different algorithms to try to predict who's going to say yes. And I think there may have been some of that at play. We'll never know for sure, but it looked a little bit like there might have been some of that at play. I think the last thing that likely had an impact, you've got this big increase in applications, I think driven a lot by test optional. Kids felt a little more free to apply. And I think a trend was that test optional was actually test optional, right? Like we didn't see big differences in students who applied with scores and students who didn't, which was really awesome. That I think that they actually were genuine in that. And it certainly showed in the results that, we have our own results, and then we have, other people in town that we all kind of share information. It did seem that test optional was definitely test optional, which we loved. And they are staying test optional again for this year. The final piece that I think probably played a little bit of a role too was that the previous class had a higher level of deferrals than in the past. So in other words, they were holding some slots for some kids who were waiting a year. So when you put all that perfect storm together, it became a little harder to get in, right? It definitely did, just by the numbers. But on the other hand, there definitely were kids that got in. And if you were to try to plot it, I'm not sure any of us could draw much of a line of what that meant, which is why I always say, if you want to apply, you should absolutely apply.
Well, one of the terms that I just want to sort of underline is Lisa's point about what we view as the asymmetrical results. There are students, wonderful students, fabulous students, who were admitted to one might consider more competitive schools than even UT Austin, and were not admitted to UT Austin. There are some students who have best friends or partners or girlfriends or boyfriends, and their boyfriend got in even though they feel like they're not as strong as I am. And so this sense that there's somehow a UT recipe, that there's somehow a sense that that it all is going to make sense and stack up. Some things really do make sense. But I think the thing we want to underscore is we have lived through the pandemic in a world where it feels like almost everything changed. That's obviously an overstatement. But at UT particularly, results that in the past, they might not have been predictable, but they had a pattern. Many of those patterns shifted.
Absolutely. And I do think I want to hit on one point Bob made, just because I think it's just great practice. When people say, oh, I don't know how someone got in with this versus that, you never know someone's application. And so when we look just at numbers, it can seem that way, but it may have been a different major. It may have been an essay that moved the dial. There's a lot of things at play here. And so I just encourage everyone that, this is asymmetrical, and trying to determine why someone gets in and someone else doesn't. It's such a large university. I'm not sure that really helps anyone. And I don't think it helps the students, right? Because students do a pretty good job, in my opinion, of it when they don't get in some ways kind of moving on. And I think one of the things of the adults in their lives is to encourage that and to be positive, because I think that tends to be more helpful to students than starting to compare everyone and that kind of thing. I'm not sure that really moves the dial.
Denard, are there any questions from folks when they registered that we can tackle before we move on to some of the topics that people have asked about in terms of testing and majors and that kind of stuff? Are there any questions specific to trends?
Yeah, no, for the most part, you all have hit those. I think that's where folks are excited to hear from us in terms of what we do. We get a little bit more time to dig into the trends. So I think there's excitement for the next slide.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to start on this, but Lisa is really going to dive into this. All professions have sort of inside baseball. They have buzzwords, and one of the buzzwords at UT, and it's very specific to UT, is fit to major. the slogan of UT is what starts here changes the world. There are some schools increasingly who are looking to fit the major as part of their holistic read. But UT, very simply, fit to major can be thought of as this. You're actually not applying to UT, you're applying to a major. And the admissions reader that Lisa mentioned before is going to read you in terms of how you fit to the major you're applying to. Another buzzword at UT is what's called impacted majors. An impacted major is really a place where there are far too many applicants for the seats in that program and those classrooms. And so those majors, which are many more than you might expect, they're not just engineering or computer science or business. In fact, econ, communications have become competitive, almost impacted majors. They're going to read a student, and as Lisa said, every piece of paper they can get, the transcript, the test scores, the resume, certainly the essays, with a fine sense of how well that student fits to that major. And ultimately, UT is trying to ferret out, is that student well suited to thrive at McCombs? Will they be able to graduate in the 4.5 years that most moms and dads expect? And so this is not capricious. This is not just a math game. This is really a school trying to understand which students are most likely to thrive in the school or major that they've applied to. That's sort of a basic sense of fit to major. Lisa, can you expand that and specifically maybe talk about some of the more competitive majors?
Absolutely. And I think first, I'm going to start with nuts and bolts because I think that's helpful. So if you are an auto admit, you have 3 majors that you can put down and you'll be considered for all 3 majors, okay? Doesn't mean you'll necessarily get them. And if you don't fit to your majors, you may not get them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get expanded resume about ways to fit to that major. So that's your auto admits. Your non-auto admits get two majors to put on there, but they rarely look at anything other than the first major, which I know people will argue with it. Always say, oh, but they asked for 2. They now have it in fine print where they say, okay, we rarely look at the second major. So the complicated piece of this is throwing one dart. So at the board, which will have some potential impact on how this is going to go. So when I said, do you want to be a Longhorn or do you want to be a computer scientist? At some point, you have to ask yourself, do I want this? Do I know I want to be a computer science major? I've already done a lot of work in it. I already know this is my thing. While I'd like to go to UT, that's my driver. And I'm going computer science, knowing how competitive it is, which is about probably 3-5% acceptance rate. Or I really want to go to UT. I really want to ultimately work in business. I'd love to go to McCombs, but actually I'm not that great at math. And so my math test scores and my math grades, and I didn't actually take calculus, were not that great. So I think it's a little risky to go business. The thing that I really encourage you all to do is to go to Wayfinder on UT's website. There are so many great combinations of ways to study things and still get out and say work in business, or not be a biology major, but actually work in the medical field. So they have like so many cool majors in almost every college that you could put twists on, right? And of course, it is also, Dinar and I were meeting with a student today and he said this, and I thought it was so true. Part of what this is in college, the success is what you put into it. So there are certain majors, if you want to be in X, you're going to need to study X, right? But ferreting that out and asking yourself that question is really, really important, because I would say that this is the biggest decision you're going to make in your UT application is what you're going to major in. It is really, as Bob said, a huge focus of how they're evaluating their candidates. So this piece is super important. So, I think it is hard for 17-year-olds to understand I have one chance at this. And so I think this is someplace where parents do want to get involved and help their student here, because it does have, a pretty big impact. So let's talk about what is the most. From year to year, we see some things become a little more impacted and then a little less impacted. I'm going to focus on the ones that we really see historically over time impacted. Computer science. A student this is computer science all over the country too, just FYI, but UT is no different. A student applying in as a specific computer science major is going to need to have an incredible amount of background in computer science. And I don't mean like they went to Code Academy. I mean, like they've done projects and they've really dug into computer science so there's a great term on activities. Are you a consumer of activities or a generator of activities? Computer science majors need to have done activities that they generated, independent kind of things. So, and internships and those kind of things. And that is definitely true at UT. Now, one cool thing is we definitely have a lot of schools in Austin where kids can get a lot of this in their school. So I love that. I think there's, many of our high schools have really good programs. And I think partially because we are a tech city. So, you can absolutely, these don't have to necessarily be things outside of school. You can use school as well, but you're going to want to have shown initiative in those majors. Okay. And that's going to be really, really important. So computer science, engineering, business, and natural sciences and nursing are what I would say are the most difficult. We have seen from like Bob mentioned, Moody for a little while was looking, but last year I think that went down a little bit. So I think those are the ones that you have to be most careful with. Now, I mean, we could talk all night about just this. There's all sorts of little nuances along the way. Some programs are really, really small. So knowing how large the program is, and UT, I would say that the departments are really willing to talk to you. That's not going to help you get in, but it could help you make a good decision, which could help you get in. Do you know what I'm saying? So definitely reach out and talk to them, because they're very, even though it's a large university, I think we have found our students have really good experiences with reaching out and actually getting the information they need. So that is really important. I would say one other major that I think it's just right now, the generation, we have so many students wanting to major in psychology. And so I do see that one, there's just not enough slots. So, and one other thing I'm going to say about fit to major, because I think there's a myth on the street about this, is that you can never change your major at UT. That's a myth on the street. It is true that those 5 impacted majors, and there are more, I'm sure, every year we're missing some, but those are the big ones, I should say. Going to be hard to get in those, right? Going to be hard. But there is a lot of places where you can move around. So that I think is important to know just as students, because, students still change their major 2.5 times, even though we're putting more pressure today on knowing your major, right? So that is really, really important to know. And I feel like that sometimes takes a little pressure off of students and families when they know that, when they're making that major choice. So I think having that conversation about how dug in is the student on their major, how important is that, and their criteria for their college, how solid is that, versus I've been dreaming of wearing burnt orange since I was 3 years old, and it would be the greatest thing ever to go to UT. What did I leave out?
I want to jump in and cover a couple of things and then turn it to you and Denard. The first thing I want to comment, students oftentimes, just because they're so aware of this, ask us questions. I had a student earlier in June say, should I consider gaming my major? Should I consider majoring in this and then transferring into this? And my answer is, first, let's start with a really honest question. Lisa asked it. Are you UT or bust or McCombs or bust? The second question, what do you want to spend 4 years studying? Because if you apply for a major and then you can't transfer into the major you thought you could bank shot in, you are going to spend 4 years studying the topic that you chose. Because UT, while they do occasionally offer minors, is really more focused on concentrations or certificates to go with major, okay? And what I want to encourage students and parents to think about is, what experience does a student want in the classroom? UT is spectacular, but most of the classes you're going to take in Gen Ed are larger than the movie theater at the Bullock. They're huge. And so a student who is thinking they can get in, I had a student the other day finally understand this and say, I studied the curriculum. I think I'm much more interested in being a strategic communications major than a management major, because I think those are the classes I want to take that prepare me for the career I think as a 17-year-old I might be interested in. That's what we want to encourage students to think of. Now, Lisa, there are a number of questions that are very specific to either engineering or computer science or business. Is there a difference between computational engineering and mechanical? Is there a difference between management and marketing? Do you want to talk a little bit at a high level? We could go down a rabbit hole, but do you want to talk a little bit at a high level about how a student might want to research and consider that?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to pivot on something that Bob said here, and then I'll answer that question, which is, I think that we sometimes have very traditional ideas of majors and what, business major hasn't really changed since I got one, 30 something years ago. And yet the business world has changed a lot. So we see a lot of students getting out in majors other than just business, and being successful, or medical school. Everyone who wants to go to medical school thinks that they should major in biology. Actually, maybe not. Let's look at what they're actually evaluating you on. Now, they're going to need some biology courses, but so I think that the digging in and looking at the coursework and looking at what the different schools, where they actually ultimately kids are going to work, is really important versus just going on data from when maybe we all went to school, which might have changed. So I think that is really important. As I mentioned, I think Wayfinder is fantastic to look at the majors, and it describes the majors, it describes the jobs you can get, all of that. I also think what Bob said is super important. Go into the major that you're interested in and look at what you're actually going to take. I cannot tell you how many students I sit with daily who don't know that, for example, a business major is a lot of math, or marine biology is a lot of physics, so it's important to actually know if you like the subjects that you're going to study and if you have aptitudes in them, because if you don't have the aptitude in them, even if it's supposedly a great major, it may not be a great major for you. So, and I do think, one thing we're noticing that I'm super excited about, the way that UT is doing these concentrations is really cool, because they're trying to give more pathways into some of the more impacted majors. And so there's a lot of cool ways to kind of do a number of different things. And I think when you think about getting out on the job market, people want people with a set of specific skills, but they also want people who can communicate, people who can read, people who can, mix it up with lots of different subjects and facts and things. So that's a place I really encourage you to start with Wayfinder, go into the department's websites. And I can't tell you usually when students, we used to do a workshop on that. It was super fun and it was just for students. And so we gave them and then they actually did it there, they did it. And then we would look at what they found and they always were so excited. I didn't know I could study this and this. So I think it's just a great thing to do at home and could potentially expand the students, options for majors as you're considering what is a really big decision in this process.
Lisa, a follow-up to that. We can't really go major by major, but how might a student determine if there is a significant difference between the admissions rate for computational engineering versus mechanical versus biomedical engineering? Is that even possible?
Some of the departments like natural sciences for a while broke theirs down. I haven't looked recently to see if they have it broken down. You can call the department and sometimes they'll give you that information. They're not like super secretive about that stuff. In engineering, civil has definitely been one that has been a little bit easier, but it's not, if you don't want to be a civil engineer, that's probably not the route to go, right? So yeah, I think reaching out to the department, really scouring their website, and at the end of the day, deciding what it is, that the student ultimately wants to do, right? Yeah. There's not a huge difference in the School of Engineering. There's minutia differences. So there are little differences, but you're not talking vast differences.
Denard, I know we had a ton of questions on Fit to Major and Major as a whole. I think we covered a bunch of them. Could you maybe pick 2 or 3 that you think might be most pertinent to the group as a whole?
I think it would be super helpful for actual high school students and audience is actually hearing how to best start thinking about a major. Like, how do you actually go through that decision process? Like, what should they be thinking about as they go through their high school, junior, senior years, or before, as they start thinking about selection and major?
Bob, you want to answer that one?
Gosh, boy, that is an entire conversation. And I will be frank with you, a conversation that animates and energizes the college match point team and our work with freshmen, sophomores, juniors, even seniors who start with us at this point. Our belief, first and foremost, is that it starts with the student inside out. What her aptitudes are, her interests are, her motivations are. And these are a series of experiments that really match to who she is, but they also allow her to go more deeply, to take initiative, as Lisa said, to show impact. And frankly, not because it looks good on an application. Denard and Bryn are team members who have also read applications. They're admissions reps. And they can tell you, I can spot a recipe resume from a mile away. The recipe resume that someone gave someone and said, do this, this, and this. It really starts with the student, who they are uniquely. The good news is UT gives them a chance to write an entire essay, which Lisa will mention, about why this major and why do you fit to it? It can't be in computer science. I'm really interested in computers and I can't wait to go there. UT is very clear. We want to admit gifted coders. We don't have enough slots to admit you and see if you can figure out if you want computer science. But Denard, the simple answer to that question is we believe that high school is all about preparing students to thrive in high school and thrive in college. And the most likely indicator is them thriving at UT Austin is deep engagement. An engagement that connects to their interests, who they are, and what their talents are. There's a lot of choices there. Is this a great activity for me? The answer is typically, are you going to be engaged by it? Are you going to be energized by it? As you become a junior, will you have an outcome of that project? Does it nurture some non-traditional leadership or traditional leadership? But I think the answer to that, quite frankly, is start with the student. And if UT is on their list, remember that UT is totally focused, even for a school its size, on making sure they nurture passionate engagement in Longhorns. Not passive consumers, as Lisa said, but generators of activities. That's what expect, that's what they want to see, and that's what a student has the opportunity to do. Lisa, anything to add there?
No, I think you hit it. I think you've got it. Denard, what else do we have?
I think that's a great overview. So I think we're ready to move on.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so like all colleges, a student, when they apply to college, are going to send their transcript, that record of their high school academic career, okay? And so same is true for UT, just for the parents in the audience. This is all going, you don't mail them anymore. It all happens via computer and via our online platforms. So that's always a little different. In terms of transcript, and I feel like we're really beating this drum, so I apologize, but it is just the reality, is that they're going to want to see that the transcript and the major matches up the best it can. Now, that is more complicated at some high schools than other high schools, right? Interestingly enough, some private schools actually have less options for some of the fit to major coursework than our public schools. So, that gets a little more complicated. So, but ideally, a student might participate if they're thinking they want to go into the health field and their school has clinicals, which is something that a lot of our high schools have, a clinical health track. That would be fantastic. That's going to show fit to major. They want to be a journalism major and they're the editor of the newspaper. Do you know what I'm saying? So we're looking for things that show that they actually have an interest in their major. So that's really important. I know people are always asking, like, how many AP courses, how many honors, what about dual credit, what about IB? And I think that what is most important is that the student is taking rigorous coursework in the areas that of their interest set, right? So I don't think they necessarily have to have every single one of them for UT, but I do think you want to show strength in your area, right? So like I said, if you want to do something math related, that you're actually good at math and that you're going to the highest level math. But maybe English isn't your thing. So you take it dual credit, or you take, there's a lot of on-ramps or whatever. So I think there's a lot of different ways to go. Just because I know people always want to know this, there is, I would say, kind of an order of, you're taking a course regular, you're taking it honors, you're taking it AP, you're taking it IB, and I think it does kind of rank out like that. People always ask, well, is dual credit as good as AP? Probably not. There might be a reason to take it though. I don't know that that's your make or break deal, but if you're just asking me flat out, not quite, So in terms of transcript, where it's really back to the other thing, we need to see some fit to major where we can, understanding that that's going to be very high school dependent, okay? And then testing, same thing. We are test optional again this year, and I would recommend that students who are not great testers to not send test scores. I know, I'm sure someone's going to ask the $50 million question, what is the right test score to send? That really is major dependent. But I would say typically for UT, probably not going to send less than, say, a 27, I would say. Being test optional, I would send scores if you feel like they really reflect on you and equal your grades. And if they don't, I'd feel confident not sending them, okay? But the other thing to realize is, going back to our English major, who's the head of the newspaper, her test scores need to be higher that correlate, the reading, the English. And likewise, if the person is in something with mathematics, then their math score. And they are heavily focused on the part of the test score that relates to the major, okay? So that is important.
I want to piggyback this test optional piece. Really randomized all of college admissions. And last fall, we really went through an exercise with students in almost saying by school, how do you want to consider submitting a test score if you have one? And I know one parent said, I've heard you talk about this. Can I just make sure I understand it? If the test score is as strong or preferably stronger than my student's transcript, submit it, because it indicates their initiative and impact academically outside of the classroom. If it's not, don't. If that test score is not actually an accurate representation of the academic strength of my student, don't submit it. And it was like, yes, you should lecture on this. You get it. Denard, are there any questions around transcripts and testing that we haven't covered?
Nope, I think we covered everything on that topic.
Fantastic.
So I'm going to start us off on what is quite possibly my most beloved section of the holistic review at UT Austin. You can tell when we talk, we are passionate about students being engaged during high school. Not just students being engaged when they hit submit to UT, but students being engaged on the other 3 years and 364 days of being in high school. And the way that gets communicated first in the holistic read is the expanded resume. Now, parents, if you are in the corporate world and you're a hirer of other human beings, you will certainly look at this and say, that's not a resume. The font should be pretty. It's 5 pages. Do not think of it as a resume. Think of it as an inventory of the deep engagement your student has had broadly and deeply from the summer before their freshman year to their senior year, okay? Be excited that UT wants to read all that and hear all that and understand that. Understand that it's a primary place that that reader will look for fit to major. There are some tricks to it that UT is specific on. Tell us how many hours a week, how many weeks a year. Those are really easy to understand. What's important is that understand that a student has the opportunity to communicate initiative and impact on that resume. And that if you're a reader, they're less impressed if a student was a passive consumer on an activity on their resume versus an active generator. The best example that I know of is computer science. It is wonderful involvement to take a class at Code Academy on Swift. It is fabulous initiative to code an app that is in the App Store using those skills you used and learned in the online class. And it is impact to, during the pandemic, build an app with a local nonprofit that solves a deep need in the community that you're a part of. And what a student pointed out to us very honestly is, I shouldn't mistake an online coding class for making a difference with my computer science skills. Those are 2 different things, okay? Lisa, what would you like to add on this great topic of expanded resume? One that within our company is almost a place of nerdery among our team.
You know, when I first started being a consultant, I naively called an admissions person that I knew, and I said, so like, are y'all wallpapering over there? You really want 5 pages per student? Like, are you kidding me? Like, it just seems so ridiculous. But it is, and 5 is not you don't need to have a 5-page resume, but you should not hesitate to include all relevant information. I'm going to talk a little bit. UT gives you an example of a resume online. And what Bob said is really true. I don't think you do yourself a service by looking like you went and had this professionally made. They want student work, okay? So be careful not to get overzealous on delivery. They're reading the information. I mean, you certainly, students can, have fun with it, but the point is what's in it. One of the very first things to decide is kind of, like if the student, assuming the student's not going undergraduate studies, in other words, they're not undecided. I should have mentioned that at some point. There is that option, but they should have their major related activity the first beat of the resume. So we just tell students, like, make up a title, health related activities, or, writing, or whatever it is. Like, it doesn't have to be that. You don't need to pick I think kind of being just your own is great. And then put all the activities that fit to that in that category. You do want that towards the top, because you want to grab the reader and let them know, oh, I actually do have some stuff to that. I actually do. So I think that's really important. The other thing I would get up as high as possible is leadership. We haven't really hit on this, but UT does, I think Bob hit on it when he said they love engaged students. So it is really critical to show any leadership, because they are really looking for active, engaged people. So those two things you want up towards the top. Remember, this is your resume. You can make it however. I once had a girl who was a student of mine, brilliant young woman, but very introverted and was not a joiner. So she says, I don't have any activities. So I started just talking. I'm like, just tell me what you do. Like, what do you do? She literally read 5 books a week. So I was like, hey, what if we just put your books? We took up so much space with her books, and she wanted to be an English major, and her books were interesting. And she got in. Now, I don't know if that's why she got in, but I mean, so you can be a little creative here. Also, if you have responsibilities within your family, like if you have to take care of your siblings, those kind of things, make sure you're telling them that, because they really do. UT admissions has a heart. I know that's hard to believe, but it really does, in my opinion. And so I would make sure that I'm including. Now, I would not, don't go overboard and tell about every family vacation and all those things, right? But you definitely want to put it that way. You also, like any good resume, here is where it is like a business resume. You want to tell the impact of what you did, not just, kids always, I played soccer. Like, well, were you the winning goalie? Were you the person who cheered the team on when they were, 0-9? Like, who were you in that? Put some color in it, because someone is actually reading it. It's bulleted. And then, make sure that you're getting everything from before freshman year on, but be sure you're not putting that you were the citizen of the year in the first grade. Okay. Because that is going to get what we call an eye roll, and we don't want an eye roll. So, so be careful there. And some students who are super active might have 5 pages, might have 6 pages. You know what I'm saying? So don't be afraid to include everything and get nice detail in there. Okay. One thing everyone always asks, you can put a link. They'll have to go and like copy it, and it's not live. But if you want to put a link, you can put a link. You never know if the reader's going to use it or not. But you have so much opportunity with this expanded resume, which is why we nerd out on it so much, because it is an incredible, again, another opportunity that no other college is really, that we know of, that is really inviting you to give this much information. So it's kind of cool that they do want all that information, and it's a real opportunity.
I think you can hear from our conversation so far that, and I don't mean this as a threat, we could spend 6 hours on this. We love this. I'm also aware that the published endpoint for this webinar is 6:30, and we're at 6:23. We're not going to just stop on the next slide. We'd love to invite you to stay with us, and we will also share the recording. But this is so important that we want to make sure we cover in depth the last couple of slides, which are actually equally important as holistic review. But I do want to be cognizant of everybody's busy schedules, but also be cognizant we just love talking about this, mainly because we love kids. Lisa, now that we talked about resumes, maybe dive into a topic that literally we could spend 6 days on, and that's the essays that UT Austin allows students to communicate through.
Well, as Bob said at the beginning of the presentation, your essays is real, and this is true in all college admissions, this is not just UT, is that chance to give a personal someone to get to know you a little bit. So it's not, remember, we just talked about resumes. So you don't need to give them a laundry list in your essays because they've already got that. So what is it that's unique about you? If I was to sit across the room and try to get to know you, would I feel if I read this essay like, when I'm evaluating our students' essays, the thing I'm thinking about is, does it sound like them? I had a student who wrote such a thoughtful essay yesterday, and his essay coach called and said, hey, can you read this? You know, he's worried. I'm like, oh, I love it because it's absolutely him. It's like if you were sitting across the table from him. So it was wonderful. So that's the point of the essays. Currently, the UT essays are as follows, and they could change. I'm not even going to, the long essay won't change. That's a personal statement about challenges or opportunities that a student has had. Really, they could write it about anything. If there's one thing on this essay I want you to know is don't get attached to the prompt. This is a general personal statement, okay? Right now, there's 3 topics. I'm going to hit on 2 of them and leave one out because I'm guessing it may change. So there's a major essay. It's probably the most important piece of the writing in this thing, I would say, is that ability. I always tell kids, you're making a legal case of why you're the person they should say yes to, who has evidence that they are a great fit for this major. So, and as much evidence as you have, right? So that is, and you've got like, I think it's 300 words, so not a ton of space, okay? And then there's a leadership essay. Again, UT loves leadership. Now, this is where a student needs to be careful not to just laundry list, but reflect on your leadership. What is it about you as a leader that's unique? A leader doesn't, we used to have a few years back, we had our essay coaches do little videos, and one of them I love is, talks about a leader who's not necessarily an extrovert, right? So quiet leadership, and what else can be leadership? Leadership could be in one's family too, right? So it can be a lot of different places. It doesn't have to be student council president, okay? Or the editor of the yearbook. It can be something else. They're wanting to learn about who you would be as a leader on that campus. And then there is a third essay right now, which really has like 5 different topics in it, but is about, kind of why UT and a little bit of diversity. And I'm guessing that one is likely to change, although who knows. They usually, when they change them, they don't change a ton, is what I would say. But we never know. There's a 4th one that I really want to highlight this year because I think it's really important. Is there anything else you want to tell us? Students and families have been through a lot in the last year and a half. If a student has something else to tell in terms of what this time has been like for them, or how it has impacted their academics, their home life, their family's financial situation, we're just seeing so many different things in ways that it's impacted people. I, again, encourage students to use that. Also, if a student has a learning difference, some kind of mental health issue that they want to disclose, the additional information is the best place to do that. I highly recommend doing it there and not in your personal statement. Your personal statement is a chance for someone to just get to know you. And you're not, if it's some kind of diagnosis or learning disability, that's not who you are, right? So you have this extra spot. I don't use it if you don't have anything, or if you're kind of trying to make something up. I think that is not appreciated. Wouldn't my admissions readers agree? But if you do have something, I think that it is really a great spot to use. And I feel like it's underutilized a lot. And then I'll talk about additional essays when we get to scholarships. You're on mute.
One comment, and then I want to ask Denard if there's one question in the list of registrant questions. and this is a topic, this is a suggestion that we make for all schools, but particularly for UT Austin. Parents cannot write students' essays. Hard stop. For 2 reasons. One, because it's your students' time to shine. I have a dear friend who's a professional writer, a published novelist. She said, I can just help here. I can just make the stories flow. I know so much about her. And the answer is, boy, aren't you teaching a master class in parenting? And this is the time for them to tell the story, even if it's unfinished, even if it has jagged edges, because frankly, the reader of the essay is expecting an essay from a 17-year-old, and they're hungry to read it. They're hungry for stories, just as they would be hungry if they had the wonderful chance to meet with your student. And then the second reason that you shouldn't coach your student is, frankly, you and they deserve to have a great summer and senior year. And parents coaching students through essays, not always, but almost always, is fraught with tension, frustration. Let your student tell their stories. Let your student own their stories. And in UT's cases, understand they get to tell stories about what has interested them, engaged them, where they've taken initiative. These are stories they've been waiting their entire high school year to tell, particularly given what they've just had to go through the last year and a half. Denard, is there one question on essays that Lisa or I haven't covered that you want to make sure we cover before we move on?
Yeah, you guys have been very thorough tonight, which is great. I think the one thing, if you could speak a little bit towards if a student is focusing on their essay, are there particular qualities that they should focus on with each question?
Well, I think that the prompts are really, I guess what I would say here, sorry, I want to say 8 things at once, is answer the question. Like, I know that sounds so crazy, but like, you don't need to for the short answers, you don't need a flowery story embedded in it, just answer the question, be authentic. And if there's one thing, and this is true for all college writing, is reflection. This is something that students really struggle with, reflection. One of the things we've started doing with our 9th and 10th grade students is having them do reflection writing, because they're not getting this in school, but the ability to reflect on experience is really such a critical part of this. It's just like gold when you get it. And so I think that digging a little deeper about what did that mean to me. Bob, what's your great line that you use on college essays? And so then?
Oh, yeah. I'm a podcast lover, and there's a great podcast that Mike Birbiglia does. And in a recent interview with Bill Hader said, I used to think that storytelling was and then. Plot point, plot point, plot point, plot point. They said it took me a long time to realize storytelling is so then. That the individual is advanced through a story, and it oftentimes has that hero's arc, or it has a twist or an unexpected piece. And Lisa and I and our team are acutely sensitive to the fact that it is a bizarre experience to ask any human being, let alone a 17-year-old, hey, could you write several thousand words about yourself personally? And by the way, these words are going to have an impact on what you do for the next 4 years of your life. You don't do that when you go to med school. You don't do that when you apply for a job or run for political office. This is a weird little thing. Just understand the good news is UT wants to know your student. UT is hungry to read this information. So Denard, to your question, specificity, authenticity. It doesn't have to be, as Lisa calls it, a neon flashbulb moment. You're not writing a screenplay. But it needs to be an essay that Bren or Mark, Michael, or Denard, if they were students, they're uniquely telling their story, their story. Not the grandfather's story, not their baseball story, not the mission trip story. There are countless sports and mission trip stories. What's important is the student's story in the setting that she's writing about, okay? Lisa, I know a lot of families had questions around honors programs. UT offers so many of them that, quite frankly, again, another 6 hours, but maybe a couple of things to consider, and maybe 1 or 2 specific things about some of the most frequently applied to honors programs.
So the first thing I would really encourage people, there are so many honors programs and they add new honors programs all the time. So I absolutely can't go through all the honors programs. And I'm sure if on this call, we have a bazillion different majors. So, but what I do want to encourage students to do is to apply to honors programs. And here's why. It gets another set of eyes on your application who has the chance to say yes, okay? So if the honors program wants you, then you have to get admitted, right? So I do believe that applying to honors programs is really, really smart. Now, you need to fit the honors program, right? So don't start randomly applying to honors programs because, again, you won't fit it. The most, the hallmark honors program of UT is Plan 2, which is an interdisciplinary major. And so Plan 2 is super unique. They do a wonderful job of letting students learn about Plan 2 you can sit in on classes, they have information sessions. So I think my biggest 2 pieces of advice here, don't write off honors programs. I'm always so shocked at how students just write off honors programs. Look into them and see if there's not one that might meet your students' interests. You can apply to more than one honors program. I would only do that if the student actually truly is interested in more than one. And the other piece that I would add is go on the website, read about them. Many of them have ways to engage with them and engage with them. In terms of the, kind of nuts and bolts, UT, when they release their essays, sometimes a little later, they'll release essay prompts for honors. There are additional honors essays. Some of them can be kind of challenging because it's an honors program, right? And so the student also has to be willing to do the work because there is definitely work involved in applying to an honors program. But I also think honors programs are such a great option for such an incredibly large university. It's a great way to have us make a bigger university a little bit smaller and more intimate. And so I love all the honors programs. And I think our students, we've had students who've done business honors and Plan 2 at the same time. I don't know how they pull that off, but they do. We've had students do almost every honors program there is at UT. And I really have never, I think sometimes some students will decide, oh, I don't want the extra work. But, I really do think that honors is a phenomenal opportunity at all colleges. I think UT does an especially good job with their honors programs. And I mean, something like Plan 2 for Texas tuition, you can get incredible education in Plan 2. And we've had, I don't know, many Plan 2 students, complete Plan 2. And that is a really phenomenal program. So I would definitely look at that as well.
One last piece of advice on this before we move on. Yeah, we keep pointing you to the YouTube website as if we're sort of an online ad
right.
For you to click on and go to the UT website. It's spectacular. It's just such a wonderful resource. And when a student says, always, as they oftentimes do to me, do you think I should apply to the Touring Scholars Program? My answer is almost always, well, I would if I were you, but have you looked into it? Have you talked to them? Have you gone to the info session? UT responded to the pandemic by offering so many virtual info sessions. We're very hopeful that as the pandemic potentially wanes, there'll be more in-person ones. Learn about the programs. Learn about the programs. Lisa, there is one question that I want to make sure we tackle before we go to the last slide and wrap up. Mechanically, what's the application process? Do you apply when you're submitting your first choice major? Is your ability to get into a major dependent on the honors program? What happens if you get rejected for honors? Give us a sense of that.
Okay, so great questions. There's 2 ways. So UT, when you apply to UT, you apply Texas, and then you get a UT portal. And on that portal, you can apply to honors there, but they've changed this every year. So we'll see what they do this year because they're rolling out a new application. So I can't totally answer that, but they did last year, they went back to allowing you to apply to honors on the actual application. The thing is, we all know students, if it's way better to go on and apply when you apply to the university, because most students will say they're going to apply and then they kind of forget if they wait and do that on the portal. Okay. So I kind of prefer, but I know there's other people that prefer to wait. So you can do it either way. You need to watch your deadlines. Getting denied from the honors program in no way hurts you on your admissions to UT at all. So that's not going to be an issue. So you don't need to worry about that. So it could only help you. It's not going to hurt you in any way. I haven't mentioned this, so this is not honors related, but UT application opens on August 1st. Everyone who lives in Austin, Texas knows that, we all think that you should get your UT application in, on August 2nd. I don't think you need to get your application in on August 2nd. And I do think you should get it in earlier-ish. So we kind of aim for our students to, and we always have students that want to get it in super fast. And if they're ready, that's great. I think this year that could be a little harder depending on, we'll have to wait and see what if they add any new questions, right? So that could make it. The best time to send your application is when your application is ready to go and finished and done well. My heart stops when I see students opening applications and starting to type stuff into it, straight into the application. I kind of think I'm going to just have a fit, because although we're saying, let it be in your student's voice, we know that if we just let a student type straight into an application, they don't even have a time to check the spelling, the grammar, and those things. And it should be a more thoughtful answer than, sit down for a few, students should spend time on these essays. So I think a good time to submit is probably sometime end of August, middle of September. Remember that transcripts are not going to go from your school until probably the middle of September. So, no matter how hard you beat the door of your school, they are actually on vacation and they're not going to come and open the doors to get your transcript. So I think that there's a middle ground here. We have to respect where the schools are at and their ability to get transcripts out. You can absolutely submit your application and your transcript can follow. So we have many students that do that they're going to do that. So, that's an option as well. I would try to get that out in September if it's done. One thing we see with students is that oftentimes these things are done, but yet they don't want to submit because they're so nervous. And I do think parents trying to encourage the students after that's been reviewed, after, everybody knows that, everything's correct in there, because it asks for a lot of demographic information and things, then go on and submit. You should go on and submit. So I think that's important. So, that's our timeline here. And I wouldn't drag it out, real long. I think that's a mistake.
Can I jump in and tease out 2 points about Lisa's comments? First off, please don't have students, and students, if you're on this, don't work on 17 things related to the UT application concurrently. Your most precious resource, particularly after the last year and a half, is your attention, your energy. Go step by step. There is a natural step-by-step progression. I have a wonderful student that I worked with, and he said, when can I open up Apply Texas and start filling out the forms? And the answer is, when you're ready for that, when you're at that step, when you're at that stage. And then the second thing on the essays is, given that step-by-step counsel, these essays are not really well done either once a week for 12 weeks, or I'm going to write the first one now, and then I'm going to come back to it at the end of July, and then I'm going to cram the night before I submit. This is deep work, a lot of reflection, as Lisa said. So you really want to be conscious and even greedy about a student's attention and energy to make sure they do it step by step, and to make sure they feel like they have plenty of time to tell their best stories to a school who's going to want to read and listen to those stories. Lisa, any last things on timeline? I think there's always a question around, what about early decision at UT Austin?
So there is no early decision at UT, any kind of binding program. They don't really have early action. That's always confusing. They do have a priority deadline. And they typically, every year they kind of change when they start reading, which is why I say some years it has been earlier than other years, and it's not super consistent. So if I were you, I would want to be the person who had their application in and ready to be read. So other things about timeline, I don't think I have any other things. I think an overall comment. So we talked about holistic admissions. Now we've been through the whole thing. It's not an insignificant amount of work to apply to UT. It really isn't. There's a lot of easier colleges to apply to in terms of everything you have to have. And so I think it's important as families for our seniors to realize that this is going to take some time, right? And make sure that your student has that time. And I think we are biased to believing that students do this better in the summer than when they're juggling 4 APs and playing in the band or football or soccer or, charity work or whatever they're doing. So I do think getting a lot of this done this summer is a really smart idea. So figuring out how this applying to college fits into your student's summer, I think is a conversation that you should have at home. I think it's an important one. Denard, anything else, Denard, or we got all our questions answered?
You guys did a great job tonight. I think one of the biggest things you were talking about is like how to make it feel manageable. And I think you spoke to that. And that was the last big question I saw.
Fantastic. And we didn't get a chance to introduce Michael Weinstein, who also is on our staff and is one of our consultants, our most recent addition, who is an English professor. I felt a little wrong not having you jump in there, and we definitely will in the future. So we're glad you were with us.
All of you have been so generous with your time. We'll be following up with a recording of this. Many of you may be aware we annually do an extensive guide to applying to UT Austin with specific guidance on the expanded resume, the essays, and all other features. As Lisa mentioned, UT, God bless them, has still not put out the all clear, this is what it's going to be this year. They're not alone. Many other schools do that. But we are updating our guide and waiting for confirmation from UT to make sure that that guide is completely representative of this year's standards and guidelines. And once that's been revised, we'll obviously share it with all of y'all. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We wish students that are on this call all the success and opportunities they deserve this summer. And we wish families on this call as little stress as is humanly possible over this summer and the fall. Don't look back and regret being stressed out by this college planning and application process. It will work out. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of the evening.
Bye.